I have to say, I feel like a rock star. This is amazing.
Wow, so many wonderful humans out there.
Not so skeptical now, are we, about psychology?
Love life and enjoy every moment.
So just to kick us off, one very quick bit of audience participation. I would like you to put your hand in the air if you have ever set a New Year's resolution. Good, so that is most of it. And please keep them in the air. Now I want you to take them down if you have ever failed to meet any of them. So only keep them up if you have stuck to all of your New Year's resolutions. I don't think I can spy any, but that would fit with the statistics. There'll be a few out there. Less than 1 in 10, our best statistics suggest, less than 1 in 10 New Year's resolutions are actually completed. And why is that? I think Haley actually put it beautifully. We have great intentions. We want to do all these good things you can see on the screens. We want to save money, lose weight, save more, but life happens. Shit happens. Stuff gets in the way. And actually, we need to be a lot more realistic about the way we behave, the way we live our lives, if we're actually going to follow through on those good intentions. And I work for an organization called the Behavioral Insights Team, or the Nudge Unit, and what we try to do is apply those lessons from behavioral science to try and improve the way that we run government. And I'm not going to go into lots of the deep science on this, because you have a panel of some of the world's leading social psychologists next, but they will probably talk through some of the common heuristics and biases that we fall into, such as present bias, which we are all subject to. So if you ask me now, what do I want to eat and do on Friday evening, I will probably tell you I'd like to eat a healthy dinner and I'd like to watch an art house movie. When Friday evening comes around and I'm tired from a busy week at work, I'll probably order takeaway and watch some trashy reality TV. And that happens to all of us. And so one of the lessons from behavioral science is to try and design our lives and our goals around some of those understandings of how we will make decisions. And we do this across many areas of government policy. So whether that's trying to help people find work, save more, complete their school, improve their grades, etc. And this was one of the first places that I started to apply this. Back in the UK in 2011, this is a job centre, the equivalent of Centrelink in a place called Loughton, Essex, so just outside of London. And if you sit in those job centres, as I did, for a matter of weeks, you will see that no one in there is happy. Not the staff, not the people in there looking for work, because the way those conversations are framed are around compliance. They are backwards looking, and they are checking what people have done. Have they done 3 job search activities over the last week or fortnight in order to get their benefits? Is that the best way that we can design our services, the best way to help people live their lives and be happy? Definitely not. And it doesn't require huge structural changes. In this case, all we did was to change the way those conversations happened in job centres. So instead of looking back and saying, I'm going to check what you have done, they sat down with people and they said, what are you going to do to look for work over the next 2 weeks? And then they use behavioral science, they use implementation intentions to then follow through. So very specifically, on Thursday morning at 8 a.m., I'm going to go to Loughton High Street and look for retail jobs, rather than this vague promise of I'm just going to look for work when life gets in the way and it doesn't happen. So we've now run hundreds of trials and interventions across various different policy areas and seen real success. But the irony was, while I was sort of out there in my day job teaching people these tricks and methods, I wasn't applying them in my own life. I was putting on weight, I wasn't saving more, my work-life balance was really deteriorating, and it became increasingly difficult to square that circle, where I was going out and telling people, this is how you set up your services and live your life, and then coming home and not following those same principles. So we ended up trying to bring all that literature together and all of that evidence and saying, well, how do we actually apply that to our personal lives? And this is what the book that we put together, me and my colleague Owen Service, called Think Small. And it's really about how do you set up your goals in a way which makes it likely that you will follow through, and break it down into a series of small steps. And there are 7 steps that we often refer to as behavioral scaffolding for your goals. So the 7 steps that I'm going to talk through are set and plan, which whatever you're doing, you need to follow. And we don't spend enough time doing that, quite frankly. Then there are a series of these tools that you can use, which I'm going to talk through very briefly. Commit, reward, share, feedback. You don't have to use them for every goal, but the more you use, the stronger that scaffolding will be. And then you have to stick at it. And again, I'm going to talk through today, there are 7 steps. Each of those has 3 rules. They're all based on quite deep scientific evidence. No one wants to hear the scientific evidence in real detail over the next 10 minutes, so I'll try and bring it to life through some personal anecdotes. So the first one is, how do you actually set the right goal? we know actually that many of the failures of New Year's resolutions and other ones is because we actually set the wrong goals. We set too many of them, they're too vague, and they're focused on things that ultimately won't make us happy. And then once you've set that goal, how do you break it down into a set of manageable steps so that you can achieve it? So there's a great experiment, if you haven't heard of it already, run by some Harvard academics, where they asked people, essentially, whether they would be happier if they gave them $20, whether they'd be happier if they spent it on themselves or someone else. And most people said, I'd be happier if I got some money and I spent it on myself, buy myself something nice. They then ran a very elegant experiment where essentially they gave people $20, and for some people, randomly allocated, they had to spend it on themselves, and a different group of people, randomly allocated, had to spend it on someone else, either a friend, family, or a stranger. And then after, they didn't really care what they've said that they were measuring, what they would buy. What they really cared about after was whether they felt happier. And I'm sure all of you can guess that those who had spent the money on someone else were much happier than those that had spent it on themselves. And actually, what does that show? It also shows us that we're very bad at predicting what makes us happy. We spend lots of time thinking about our goals in terms of very material things, buying a new car, which we then sit in traffic and it doesn't make our life any better, or moving out to the suburbs, and then we get stuck on a long commute, buying the new iPhone and then stuck glued to our phone. So it's really important, and many of the things you will have heard about today, strengthening your social relationships, getting fit and healthy, getting back to nature, learning a new instrument, they are the things that if you're going to do this and follow through, make sure you're focused on the right goal. And then once you have the right goal, think about how you're going to break it down. Lots of people get stuck because they just have that overarching goal rather than breaking it down into small steps. So we're doing lots of work both in Australia and the UK around things like apprenticeships and further education, where lots and lots of kids sign up for these things and they end up dropping out. It just feels like this really distant goal. And actually we've shown that actually if you can sit down with young people and get them to plan even how they're going to study. Do they study better in 30-minute blocks or an hour blocks? How long are you going to spend this week? What are you going to do about your phone to try and reduce that distraction? If you break that down, we've seen vast improvements in attendance and achievement, about 10% increase in people finishing their courses just with some of these simple tweaks about breaking down that goal. The second is actually then how do you make a plan to achieve those goals? First rule is always keep it simple. Again, many of the reasons people fail their goals, even things like diets, because it's too complex. I'm going to reduce the number of calories. That's a very difficult thing to stick to. Much easier, that's why things like the 5-2 are quite popular, just have very clear, what's called in the psychology, bright lines. I'm not going to eat any dessert. I'm not going to drink beer at home in the week. How do you just try and make it as simple as possible and then create these actionable plans? We've done some work here in New South Wales in the domestic violence space and actually working very closely with the Aboriginal Services Unit. And often there, when people have an apprehended domestic violence order, so it often means it comes with a set of conditions, they leave that courthouse and they haven't really planned how they're going to comply with that order. So many of those orders will involve things like if you drink alcohol, you can't go home. If you do, you breach and you can end up in jail. But most people, when they leave the courthouse, either haven't really taken that on board or they think, well, I just won't drink. And we know that's not realistic. So what we do now is sit down in the courthouse, the Aboriginal support worker will sit down and make a plan with these workers and say, okay, well, if you do drink, what are you going to do? If you drink, I'm going to text Uncle Bob and make sure I can stay there. We haven't got the results for this yet, but really positive feedback so far, good early results about actually just sitting down with people and helping them plan how they're going to comply with these orders can be very effective. The third step is about committing. And many people, when we come to this example, hopefully it will resonate around the gym. Now, many people say to me, well, I bought a gym membership, so I have made a commitment. I've made a financial commitment. That is not a financial commitment. Well, it is a financial commitment, but it's not the right type of one. It actually makes you feel better that you are going to do something, even though the reality is you often never turn up. So I had a situation where I bought a membership to a gym right by where I worked, and I just didn't go, again, for weeks on end. So in the end, I made a commitment in the right way that aligns with the science. I wrote it up on the whiteboard behind us in our office, which said, I will go to the gym at least twice a week for the next 3 months, or I will buy and wear a Robin Van Persie shirt. And Robin Van Persie at the time was the striker for the team that I most despise. I'm a Tottenham fan. He was an Arsenal player at the time. And it was very, very successful because it was public. I'd been very specific about what I was going to do, and I had a very specific consequence if I didn't follow through. The next step is around rewards. To be honest, this is the most nuanced one in the literature. There is lots of conflicting evidence, and it is very easy to set these up in a way that backfires. You end up squeezing out some of your intrinsic motivations by putting a reward to something. So actually, the example I'm going to give is a much smaller one. Rather than thinking about these big rewards, how do you build daily habits? Some of the best examples I've seen are when people only listen to their favorite podcast or musician when they go to the gym. Or they only have their favorite shake or meal after they've done a workout or practice an instrument. For me, I knew I was having a child and my work-life balance was really bad, and I wanted to get into a good habit. So I spoke to my wife and I said, well, how can we try and make a plan to improve that? And what we agreed was if I wasn't home by 7 p.m. And stopped work, we'd have to watch the sort of reality TV, which is the 97th version of The Block. But if I got home before 7, we could watch the Netflix box sets, whether that was The Crown or Mindhunter or whatever it was. What was clever about that was actually it wasn't just going to affect me. I knew I was affecting the happiness of someone else very close to me if I didn't follow through. And actually, that really radically changed my work-life balance and has actually made it much easier. Now I do have a little girl, little Effie, and a much greater reward to now get home for bath time and for food time. The next one is around share. And if there's one thing I want you to take away from this talk is that lots of the talk in this area is around self-improvement. But it very rarely just involves the self. And actually, if you think about any goal you have ever achieved, it is most likely involved and relying on other people. So actually, the most important thing is to think about how do you ask for help, how do you bring in other people, tap on your social networks in order to achieve that goal. There's a great experiment from the US again, where they asked people, if you asked someone on the New York subway if you could borrow their phone, what proportion of people do you think would say yes? Most people say, it's under a third of people say they think that people would actually give it up. Then when they ran that experiment and actually asked people, can I borrow your mobile phone to make a call, nearly a half did. We massively underestimate the sort of pro-social and goodwill of other people. So how do we try and draw that in, and how do we tie that to the way that we set up our goals? Think about ways that you can draw on those social networks. So one of the things that I instituted at our work was actually something called FitFeb, where every February we have a points-based game, essentially, at work, and you get points for eating healthily, for not drinking alcohol or sugary drinks, and you also get points for working out, and you get double points if you work out with other people, and there are extra points for doing them in the office. So you create this norm and a sense that everyone is starting to get more healthy. And again, it can just help to kickstart some of those healthy behaviors that you can then carry on after the month finishes. The last two, so feedback. Often we set these goals and then we'll go months without ever working out, are we actually on our way to achieving that goal? And how do I compare to others? This has changed in the last couple of years quite radically for all of us, I imagine, with technology. So I just got a buzz for my 10,000 steps of the day on my Fitbit, and the ability to quantify our actions and our achievement to our goals, particularly in the physical activity space, is being revolutionized. But it doesn't always need to be this sort of high-tech types of equipment. There are many much more simple. So I'm trying to make sure, particularly with my little girl, that we are speaking to my family back home, and I will tick off when we're having FaceTime with my parents and my family back in the UK so that she gets to see them. It doesn't always need to be high-tech, but make sure you are measuring it and your progress against that goal. Otherwise, you will never know if you're going to make it. And the final one is stick. And again, there's been lots of debate and focus in the literature recently around things like grit and Angela Duckworth's work, Malcolm Gladwell's work on the 10,000-hour rule. But actually, that can sometimes distract us. I think that 10,000 hours rule is actually overly focused on quantity rather than quality of effort that we put in. So actually, I calculated that I have spent probably 6,000 hours now practicing football, and I've never got any better. Because every time I just turn up and have a kick around. Or if you think about when you just go for a jog, you never really get any fitter because you're not practicing with deliberate effort. So you should think about, if I am practicing, how do I do it in a way which really extends and develops my skills? So if I was playing football, I should be doing drills which are specifically working on things like my very poor ball control or my poor left foot. Or if I'm going jogging, I should be thinking about, well, is it hill runs and how much in my times do I want to reduce by? And it's also important that we do test, learn, and reflect and celebrate achievements. So the other thing about grit is that you just you have almost this stubbornness and you stick to it. But that isn't always the right option either. You need to be flexible. If you set a goal at the start of the year and you find out that actually learning this new instrument is extremely hard, and actually you're not getting any enjoyment out of it, the argument is not, we'll spend the next 6 months just keeping at it. Actually, maybe that isn't the right thing. Maybe you try another instrument. Or actually, maybe it's that you're doing it in the evening when you're really tired from work, and actually be much better off doing that on the weekends. So think about how is it that you can adapt those goals and try different things. Now, in government, that often means literally trialing different approaches. So we will randomize the way, the messages that we send young people in order to encourage them to study or encourage them to attend their work. We can run those sort of large-scale randomized control trials and work out exactly what message or what time of day or what type of hook is really going to cut through. You can't do that with a sample of one. But what you can do is systematically go through and think about, okay, what are those small tweaks that I can make? Actually, when I practice, or how, or who with. And it's those sort of small details, again, that will allow you to refine your approach and then hopefully to achieve your goal. And the final part of that is also just reflecting and celebrating success. Quite often we charge through life from one goal to another. We actually never take the time to reflect. There's actually been some great studies that was involved in some call centers, and actually what they showed was just spending 10 minutes each day reflecting on what you'd learned massively increased both your productivity and your happiness as well. So make sure that you are reflecting as you go, but also that you take your time once you've achieved that goal to reflect on what you've learned and also to celebrate it. I now try and have photos up of anything that we've achieved so that it reminds me of the good times and what you can achieve when your training gets tough or you get really busy at work. Remember those pictures. So that's the framework. And essentially what it tries to do is bring that wealth of behavioral science literature together and it puts it into a practical framework. A lot of people say, think small. Doesn't that mean you should be reducing your ambitions, reducing what you're trying to achieve? And that's absolutely not the message. Our message is you should be ambitious. You should be sort of dreaming big, reaching big. But in order to do that, you need to break that down, use those 7 steps, make sure you get the small details right. And if you can get those small details right, it will make a big difference, hopefully, to the lives of you and the people around you. Thanks.